My mother has called my autistic wife some horrible names following a fight. This happened almost a week ago and I, 25M, have an awful memory, so details are already getting fuzzy. I have been writing this post for days, trying to get things written correctly. I am also not sure where to put this exactly. Sorry for the long post, but here we go. My mother has never been a big fan of my wife, 26F. Things came to a boiling point after my mother started talking to my wife about my wife's grandmother. This will require context later. My mother kept pressing that my wife and my decision to go no contact with my wife's grandmother was unfair and that we should allow her back into our lives. My wife ended up in tears trying to explain to my mother why that will never happen. My mother kept pushing. I should have told her to stop, but I didn't. Eventually the conversation ended and we moved on. This all happened on a Tuesday, I believe. Later that day, my wife tells me she has a surprise for me set up for Thursday. Even later in the day we get a group message from my mother stating we are going out to eat with my step-grandparents Thursday for dinner at 5:30. My wife privately messages my mother stating we already have plans and won't be able to go. This upsets my mother. I don't remember what was said first or by who exactly, but eventually it comes down to on Wednesday my mother proclaiming that those plans we had for Thursday were made by my wife after their altercation about her grandmother so that my wife could pull me away from spending time with my mom. My mom had sent texts to my wife saying things like plans change. It is now important to add that I am only available for a few days as I am home on leave for New Year's during this period, so there is limited time. I had already spent time with my step-grandparents, and although I'd like to spend more time with them, I was told we had plans Thursday that I couldn't know about because it was a surprise. At one point my mother says that she knows about the surprise and that my wife had lied about having it planned for days. After the back and forth with my mother, my wife was very upset. Everything had added up and boiled over. My wife was upset about three things. 1. How my mother talked to my wife about her gram, making my wife out to be the bad guy for cutting the gram out. 2. Making plans for us without asking if we had anything else going on first. 3. Calling my wife a liar. I went over to speak with my mom, alone, and try to get things ironed out. My wife and I wanted her to apologize for those three things. After speaking with my mother and trying to explain more on the gram situation and why we aren't ready to have that person back, I was told, for one, she will not apologize for talking about the gram, which is whatever at this point, there are bigger issues. Wife agreed. She said my wife was being controlling for wanting to be informed about plans before they were made, and that things can change and don't have to be set in stone black or white. And lastly, she said that my wife did lie about having this surprise planned for days. My mom said she contacted the person involved in the plans and confirmed that they were told about it Tuesday night. Remember, that was the night my mom spoke to my wife about her gram. So, at that point it does seem to me like my wife had lied. More on that later. She went on to say that my wife was being manipulative, evil, and narcissistic, and that she is tired of my wife ruining family events. My mom thinks my wife made these plans because she was upset about the way my mom talked about her gram and wanted to get me away from my mom. My mom also said that anytime her and my wife have issues, my wife talks to my dad. Found this to be false later, will explain later in story. I don't remember if it was during this conversation, but at one point my mom says she contacted the person and verified plans were made with them until Tuesday afternoon. At this point I'm upset with both of them, mother and wife. My mom for being rude about the gram situation on top of calling my wife some horrible names. And my wife for potentially lying about the surprise planning and for her over-the-top reaction to what my mom had said about her gram. My mom also mentioned that this person couldn't make it, so the surprise was no longer happening anyway. To me it was rude what my mom said, but it's her opinion on the situation. My wife doesn't like talking about her gram but hadn't communicated that boundary clearly to my mom, so I thought she just needed to say no more talking about the gram and we could move on from that. But the way my mom responded, calling her those names, was the bigger issue. After getting back to my wife and explaining what went down, she started reacting harshly. She was mad at me for not being able to get my mom to apologize and for not defending her good enough. She thought that had I defended her properly, my mom would have had to apologize. There are a lot more details and words, but my memory is fuzzy. What's important is that my wife and I started arguing about the whole situation. I'm pretty upset with her at this point because in my mind my mother is correct about her lying and setting this surprise up last minute. Later, my wife tells me what the surprise is so that I can have better context about the things being said. My parents are divorced and have been since I was 2. I see my dad every now and that, but not super often. My wife had contacted him Tuesday afternoon asking if he would like to meet Thursday to spend the day with us. My dad said he would try, but he had to give someone a ride that day, so he's not 100% sure if he could make it, but he would try to figure it out. He hadn't said anything about needing to cancel to my wife yet, but apparently when my mom contacted him, he mentioned he was canceling the plans since there were plans already made he didn't know about. This infuriated my wife. It looks as though my mother made my father cancel plans because she wanted us to go with her Thursday instead. My wife's father was able to confirm my wife had been planning on having my dad visit since at least Sunday because she had mentioned it to her dad. She hadn't contacted my father to set up a date because she had to first figure out what other plans I had with other people. So, she had the idea of it Sunday but didn't contact my dad until Tuesday afternoon. My wife messages my father asking if he is canceling because my mother said that he is. He says, "I didn't realize there were conflicting schedules, so I did agree to cancel." Agree to cancel, so it sounds as if my mother suggested he cancel first. At some point later, I messaged him and asked him to be honest, and he tells me if he would cancel even if she hadn't said anything to him. He said he would have canceled either way because he needed to give that person a ride and wasn't able to get anyone else to do it in time because of the short notice. Knowing what I know, I call my mom and explain to her that I can confirm my wife didn't lie. She downplays it, saying just because she had the idea Sunday doesn't make it a plan since she didn't text my dad until Tuesday. I said even so, this proves my wife didn't do this out of spite. She had the idea for it long before my mother had the talk about her gram. My mom dismissed what I was saying and continued on about how my wife is evil and ruined my trip just like she's ruined others. I will explain this comment more later. At this point, I'm so angry with my mother for the things she is saying about my wife, despite the fact that in my mind I've proven my mom wrong, so I just hang up. I asked my wife to see the messages my mom had sent to her earlier, now that I know more information and know what the surprise was going to be. Tuesday, the date plans are made. This is after the group text saying we are going to dinner, names removed. Additional context, I was leaving the area Friday morning, so working on limited time. Wife's dad is coming up Thursday to spend the day with him. I talked to his dad this morning and planned it. He has no idea, he wants to surprise him. Mom, my dad, can come tomorrow. Wife, he and his stepdad have plans tomorrow, Wednesday. Mom, guess that will be changing. Wife, not sure when they are planning to go. My stepdad and I, he said he texted him earlier and his stepdad told him won't know until morning. Mom, stepdad said going to the range can change. Having dinner with step-grandparents is more important. Wife, asterisk picture a drawn-out schedule for the week asterisk. Mom, what is that? Wife, the schedule we made the day after we got here. Mom, schedules change. Wednesday. Mom, we'll have all day free tomorrow. Wife, we already had plans. You didn't even ask us if we had plans for anything this week. You made other plans for us, then basically tell me screw our plans we already had. I'm sorry, but our plans are not changing. Wife, asterisk screenshot of messages to my dad from Tuesday confirming plans for Thursday asterisk. Again, he did say there could be issues, but he would try. Mom, why are you sending me that? Mom, I spoke with his dad today, plans have changed. Wife, BC, came back and said you told him I lied about tomorrow. Mom, that was a misunderstanding. I said you lied to me. Which you did. You said these plans have been made when you got here, on Sunday. I spoke with his dad today and he said you reached out yesterday afternoon. Wife, yes, I messaged him at 4 p.m. yesterday. You texted us at 8 p.m. with other plans. Mom, you said plans were made right after you got here. Mom, his dad canceled anyway, there are no longer plans with him tomorrow. Wife, my dad, didn't tell me that. I haven't heard from him today. Wife, I was waiting on me to decide when he was headed home and when he was going with my stepdad, which was decided yesterday. Me is only here today and tomorrow and heading back. We still need to go visit my gram and pap tonight after I'm done working. We haven't got to see them yet. We already got to see step-grandparents. Me only had Sunday through Thursday for plans. We don't have time to do everything. I was mad at my wife for overreacting, saying she won't be attending any events that involve my mother. After reading the messages though, my anger shifted to my mother. She completely disregarded my wife's plans and even texted my dad about the situation. She called my wife awful names to my face when I tried to confront her about it. And even after I proved to her that these plans were at least thought of days ago, she dismissed them. I contacted my dad, trying to find the truth since in my mind he would be a neutral third party. I've always heard you won't get the full truth from either side in a situation. He confirmed that he would have had to cancel either way. I ended up just sort of venting my frustrations to him, explaining both sides as best I could. He even agreed that what my mother said, specifically calling my wife evil, was just insane. I also asked him about my wife going to him when she has issues with my mother. He said, how would I know when she, wife, has issues with your mom, so it sounds to me like she doesn't do that like my mother claimed. At some point I started getting texts from my sister just saying I should spend time with my mom and that my mom was struggling with me being angry at her and not really talking to her anymore. I explained to my sister how disrespectful my mom was to my wife. We went back and forth about how upset my mom was and that there was a misunderstanding that I wouldn't be doing anything with my mom anymore. I explained I still would, but my wife won't, and that makes me sad because obviously I want my wife to be there. I told her my wife deserves an apology for what was said about her and how my mom told me she wasn't going to do that. My sister then said my mom was just agreeing with what my dad said. At this point my anger shifts to my dad. So, I asked him if he called my wife these things while talking to my mother. He complained about being dragged into the mess. Eventually what I got out of the conversation was he never called her evil, and he did mention the word narcissistic, but it was in a place of curiosity, not judgment, whatever that means. It seems like he didn't say those things about her, but I'm not sure. I don't have those messages to know for sure. My anger for my dad fades as I realize, even if he did say that, he didn't say it to me like my mom did. My mom didn't mention my dad saying it. She said those things as if it was her own words, so that is how I see them. Evil, manipulative, and narcissistic. Those words echo in my head, and every time I think of it, I get more and more angry at my mother. I had to explain to my wife that although I am very upset with my mother, but I can't ruin the relationship I have with her. My mother has chronic lung issues. Last I knew, her lungs were around 60% dead tissue. She had been in and out of the hospital recently. I've always been a mama's boy. I love her to death. I fear for her passing constantly. I can't be in the middle of some big feud with her and have her pass. I can't ruin that relationship with her potential to go soon. What I have done though is explain to my sister, who asked about it, that I'm holding back. I want to say some very awful things to my mother in retaliation, but I won't. I want to temporarily cut her out of my life, but I won't. I can't make that mistake and have her pass without making up. What I have done is be very short with my mom. I won't talk to her unless she talks to me. I avoid looking at her when possible. I need her to know she hurt me with her comments. I want her to apologize, but I know her well, it won't happen. My wife has a problem with overreacting. Part of our long argument following this situation focused on that. I was able to get her to admit that she overreacts. I explained to her that I believe she needs to apologize for the way she reacted following this situation. She agreed, but won't be the first to apologize. I honestly can't even remember what she did anymore because too much has gone on. That's a bigger issue. She has always been this way. Part of the conversation I had with my mom was about this. Context. The situation with my wife's gram. My wife had a very close relationship with her gram. To keep things short and simple, my wife had moved in with her gram. Her grandmother had issues with her mom and dad over money. There was a massive blowout. Her grandmother said that my wife's mom, who is the Graham's daughter, was no longer a daughter to her. The Graham tried to make my wife pick sides and cut out her parents. My wife refused and tried to stay neutral in the situation. Her Graham snapped and told my wife she was being kicked out of the house and all of her things would be taken outside. This was March 2019 in the Northeast USA. There's potential for snow to ruin everything. My wife tried to get the Graham not to do this. Eventually, the Graham agreed to give my wife, I think, 2 days to move out. Awful things were said. My wife made the decision that she couldn't have her Graham in her life anymore. My wife was always terrified she might see her Graham in public. She had very strong emotions over the situation. She started therapy. She has been diagnosed with depression and PTSD over this. My wife previously ruining family events. My wife was diagnosed with severe autism somewhat recently. Probably 2022. She has not told anyone but me and her parents and wanted it to stay that way till she is ready to share, but it came up with my conversation my wife had with my mother Wednesday, and she is upset that it came out before she was ready for anyone else to know. My wife told my mother this in an effort to get my mother to better understand my wife's views. She is embarrassed by it because she is worried how others will perceive her after they know. To me, it explains her behavior. She can't help it. She doesn't think about things like most people do. She can't control herself like most people can. It explained her need for schedules. It explained her need to have things a specific way. Autism affects people in many different ways. To me, the issues she has been the center of are explained by her autism. She needs things to be a specific way for her. When things don't go her way, she makes it an issue. It's unfortunate and it causes problems, but I don't think she can control it. During this altercation was the first time my wife had told my mother about having autism. There have been multiple issues in the past where my wife had taken things a bit extreme and overreacted with my family, but with the diagnosis, it made much more sense after. We have been together 11 years and married for 5. I understand her and know how to keep her from going too far now, so she is more controlled now. ESP with her meds she's been on since her diagnosis. I am adding this portion to make the point that this is a build of years of emotions between my wife, my family, and specifically my mother. At this point, I have no idea what to do. I feel I have nobody to talk to about this. My wife is involved, my mom, my sister, my dad, and I even got a few messages from my stepdad saying nobody needs to apologize and we should all just move on. I'm so angry at my mother for what she said and her complete dismissal of my wife making plans. I feel like I'm not getting the full story from my dad. I've had very little contact with my mother. I've barely even looked in her direction. Am I wrong for treating my mother this way? Does she deserve it? Does she deserve more? Does my wife need to apologize? I have no idea what to do. Any and all advice welcome. Edit, I have been seeing a lot of confusion in the comments. To be clear, I was not the one to disclose my wife's diagnoses. She told my mother that during the conversation about her Graham.